Every single one of these hate crime hoaxes, going back 30 years, has been a fraud. This is just the latest example of a trend that we've all seen for decades now. In pretty much every case, when pathological liars feel trapped, when they realize they've lost all their credibility and their power, they don't suddenly decide to become honest people. Instead, they simply continue lying. I mean, think of Elizabeth Holmes after the collapse of Theranos, one of the most obvious clear-cut cases of fraud imaginable. From prison, Holmes has refused to take any responsibility, even though she orchestrated the entire fraud. She still claims she's a victim. There are about a million other examples, from Jussie Smollett to Bernie Madoff. The only way forward in the liar's mind is to come up with even bigger lies. And that's all they really know how to do. The more desperate they become, the more trapped they feel, the more obvious their frauds become as a result. At the moment, as a particularly depressing and financially insolvent Pride Month continues to trudge along, there is no greater illustration of this phenomenon than the so-called LGBT movement. These activists understand that they've been discredited. All of their narratives about alleged hate crimes from Matthew Shepard onward have collapsed under the slightest scrutiny. All of their claims about not having equal rights and just wanting to live their own lives without bothering anybody have fallen apart as well. And that's why Pride Month ultimately is dying. And in response, rather than engage in any introspection, LGBT activists have predictably decided to push yet another lie. And this one, even by their standards, is truly staggering, not just because it's so grotesque and evil, but also because there are precisely zero sane people that would possibly be convinced by it. I'm talking about the decision by LGBT activists to push a bizarre and obviously false narrative about the recent death of a 59-year-old actor named Jonathan Joss, who was well known for voicing the role of John Redcorn in the King of the Hill show. He also appeared on Parks and Recreation. And according to activists, as well as several other media outlets, Joss was just a few days ago executed in front of his home by a homophobic bigot who had been tormenting him for a very long time in various ways, all leading up to his eventual execution in this homophobic hate crime. And as proof of these extraordinary claims, the activists point to the following statement, which was posted on Facebook by somebody identifying as Jonathan Joss's husband. And here's the relevant part of it. And as you listen to this, imagine you're a detective arriving at the scene of this homicide, trying to figure out who's telling the truth. And then imagine that this is what an alleged witness tells you. So I'm going to read it now. Quote, "My husband, Jonathan Joss, and I were involved in a shooting while checking the mail at the site of our former home. The home was burned down after over 2 years of threats from people in the area who repeatedly told us that they would set it on fire. We reported these threats to law enforcement multiple times and nothing was done. Throughout that time, we were harassed regularly by individuals who made it clear that they did not accept our relationship. Much of the harassment was openly homophobic. When we returned to the site to check our mail, we discovered the skull of one of our dogs and its harness placed in clear view. This caused both of us severe emotional distress. We began yelling and crying in response to the pain of what we saw. While we were doing this, a man approached us. He started yelling violent homophobic slurs at us. He then raised a gun from his lap and fired. Jonathan and I had no weapons. We were not threatening anyone. We were grieving. We were standing by side. When the man fired, Jonathan pushed me out of the way. He saved my life. Jonathan is my husband. He was murdered by someone who could not stand the sight of two men loving each other." Close quote. That's the story. Now, having read that out loud, even if you know nothing about this case at all, you can immediately see the problem. And it's a pretty big one. None of it makes any sense. It's incoherent. It's the kind of thing that somebody would write if they've lost their mind. If you live in reality, you know that gay men living in San Antonio are not going to be stalked for years by roving gangs of homophobes who taunt them with the skulls of their dead pets and then light their home on fire and then shoot them. Okay, it's not the kind of thing that happens outside of the fevered imaginations of very delusional activists. It reads like a screenplay that was written by a demi-queer NYU student who's, also happens to be high on meth or something. At no point should anyone have even pretended to take this statement seriously for any reason. It discredits itself. It makes no sense. So We know that the man was killed, but there is no reason why we would take that statement at face value to explain how exactly he was killed and why. But a lot of people did present this statement, as incoherent as it clearly is, as a serious, believable account by a first-hand witness. Not just believable, but according to LGBT activists, it's absolutely unassailable. It's bulletproof evidence that this is exactly what happened. And the media treated it that way too. In the UK, The Independent ran this headline, quote, "King of the Hill actor Jonathan Joss was killed in a homophobic hate crime after years of threats, husband says." So they're leading with the statement from this alleged husband without pushing back in any way. Outlets like Variety and MSNBC did the same thing. So did some very popular accounts on social media. The account Discussing Film, which has more than 2 million followers, wrote, quote, "Jonathan Joss, the voice of John Redcord in King of the Hill, has sadly passed away at the age of 59 after being shot in a homophobic attack." So they're not even qualifying it as husband says. They're just saying it was a homophobic attack. The pop culture site TuneHive posted this report, which has more than 14 million views. Quote, "King of the Hill voice actor Jonathan Joss was murdered in a homophobic hate crime. His husband confirms." Here's another post with 5 million views. Quote, "They burned down his house, killed him and his husband's dog, showed them the dead dog's skulls, called them homophobic slurs, and then shot them." And there were thousands more posts like this all over the internet, from X to Reddit to Facebook to Instagram and everywhere else. Here's another post with hundreds of thousands of views. Quote, "This is why the LGBTQ plus movement is necessary. This is why Pride Month is necessary. People shouldn't fear stepping outside to check their mail just for loving somebody of the same sex. If you think otherwise, go F yourself." So the LGBT community is unanimous. This was a homophobic hate crime. A gay man was executed in cold blood, in broad daylight, simply for being gay. But if you look a little more closely at this situation, as in if you spend like 5 seconds looking into it, you'll immediately find a few very fundamental problems with these claims. First of all, to begin with, here is a picture of Jonathan's alleged quote-unquote husband. And you can see it here. The quote-unquote husband is on the left. Now, admittedly, like Ketanji Brown Jackson, I'm no biologist. But that looks a lot like a woman who is claiming to be a man. And indeed, this particular woman has a trans flag on her Facebook profile. In other words, there's no husband involved here. And as much as we all recognize that definitions and facts aren't really important to the LGBT movement, it seems like a big issue for their narrative that this was a homophobic attack. And given that little detail, you might be wondering, well, who exactly is this woman? How credible is her story exactly? Well, she married Joss just a few months ago on Valentine's Day of this year. They hadn't known each other very long before that. And now this woman is claiming to know that for years, Joss has been tormented by neighbors who supposedly torched their home. But the opposite is true. I mean, she's completely inverting reality. Here's a report from a local news station just a few months ago, shortly after the house fire. Quote, "Joss said he left the house to go eat earlier on Thursday and thought he had turned everything off. He said he had been using a propane heater in the home for warmth. Mistakes happen, man, and it's my fault for, I guess, leaving something on," Joss said. "Or if somebody came in and did something, who knows?" Close quote. Well, that's a helpful bit of context that was strangely missing from the post that Joss's alleged quote-unquote husband wrote on Facebook. She suggests that homophobes burned the house down, but she leaves out the fact that Joss admitted that he'd been using a propane heater for warmth and also admitted that he had probably made a mistake because he might have left it on. And she also leaves out the fact that the local utility company had cut the power to the house and that it was slated for demolition. More on that later. In any event, essentially he's acknowledging that, yes, he burned his own house down, and that's not all the information that Joss's alleged husband left out. Watch.
This house was built by my dad in 1957 for my mom.
This was no role, but real-life heartbreak for actor Jonathan Joss when his family home on Dorsey Street burned down in January. On Sunday, neighbors say he was back on the now empty lot, checking on the Southside property when he got into a deadly confrontation. In the neighborhood, people say Joss made his presence known and not always in a good way.
We would see him down the street, yelling, ranting and raving, sometimes walking up and down the street.
Neighbors say Joss took the whole private property concept very seriously. Even after his house had burned down, they say he fiercely protected not only what was behind this fence, but well beyond it.
And just different things. He'll argue with different people.
Maybe somebody would drive by his home. He didn't like people driving in front of his home.
One neighbor says she saw similar behavior from Joss Sunday, although it's still unclear exactly how that led to him being shot.
So according to the neighbors, Joss would scream at passing cars. He would regularly harass innocent people in the community. He would act, in other words, a lot like an unstable drug addict with mental health issues, right? That's how he would act. And that's just the beginning. Here's a report from the local station WFAA, which has more details from the day that Joss died. Quote, neighbors said that Joss was at the site Sunday night checking his mail, which he did regularly, when something went terribly wrong. A video shared by a neighbor who was present shows a man, who they identified as Joss, pacing up and down the street with a pitchfork and screaming. The neighbors say that it was common behavior over the years for Joss to scream while carrying weapons. And even though they say they didn't like it, several neighbors said they were surprised when a man who lives just 50 yards away responded to the situation with a gun around 6 p.m. on Sunday, close quote. Now, before I read the rest of this paragraph, it's worth repeating this line. The neighbors say it was common behavior over the years for Joss to scream while carrying weapons. And on the night he was killed, Joss was pacing up and down with a pitchfork and screaming. Again, none of this made it into the husband's, quote unquote, account of events. Instead, we're supposed to believe that Joss was just minding his own business, checking the mail, when somebody shot him for no reason other than the fact that he's gay, even though he's in a relationship with a woman. Now, if that sounds a little hard to believe, it gets even worse. Let's continue reading from the local news report. Quote, many neighbors said that Joss and Alvarez had a long history of trouble. They say both men had been showing weapons and trading threats for years. The feud took many forms. Weapons, everything, guns, shootings at all times of night, one neighbor said, adding the men didn't shoot at each other. No, just shooting rounds at their own property and stuff. You could just hear the multiple rounds just blowing off on both ends, and he would be yelling a lot, close quote. So there was just some casual gunfire on both sides of the dispute. It was a regular thing, apparently, and it was a conflict that Joss was obviously participating in actively. According to various news reports, police have been called to the Joss residence more than 60 times so far this year alone for a variety of reasons, from welfare checks to reports of shootings and fires. The callers reported that Joss had been carrying crossbows and pointing them at people, which led police to confiscate the weapon last summer. Also, it's emerged that neither Joss nor his alleged, quote-unquote, husband actually owned the home that burned down. In fact, the property was slated for demolition before it mysteriously burned down. Quoting from Fox San Antonio, quote, city officials saying that the home Joss and his, quote-unquote, husband had lived in was slated for demolition well before the fire in January of 2025. According records from the city of San Antonio's Dangerous Assessment Response Team indicated that neither Joss nor his husband owned the property. According to city officials, after several reports of theft and mental health concerns, the DART team got involved. After inspecting the property, the building was brought before the Building Standards Board, which ordered it demolished. DART then gave the couple a notice to vacate. The homeowner consented to the demolition of the home, and services were disconnected from the property in October of 2024. Officials say the home then sat on a list of homes to be demolished before a fire on January 23rd destroyed most of the structure, killing at least one dog in the blaze, close quote. So the home was going to be demolished because of the state that it was in, and then after that, mysteriously, it burns down. Again, these are not facts that suggest that Joss and his quote-unquote husband were living the most stable life or that they were being tormented by random, mysterious homophobes. It looks a lot like they were very unstable people. You can't put a price on truth, but you can put a price on where you get it. Save 40% on new Daily Wire Plus gift memberships for Father's Day with code DAD40 at dailywire.com/gift. You may feel like you keep juggling expensive supplements that are just getting more unaffordable to keep up with. If that's the case, then Everyday Dose will be a lifesaver for you. Everyday Dose transforms your morning coffee into a powerhouse of vitamins, minerals, and amino acids, all in one affordable cup. Just 30 seconds to prepare, and you're getting your caffeine fix plus all the nutrients your body needs. One delicious cup, one simple solution. Everyday Dose isn't just coffee, it's coffee plus benefits. They've infused their 100% Arabica beans with lion's mane, chaga, collagen protein, and brain-boosting nootropics for clean, sustained energy without the crash or jitters. You can choose between their mild Coffee Plus, which is light, smooth, and gentle on sensitive stomachs, or Coffee Plus Bold, which is a rich, full-bodied medium roast with an extra energy kick. Both deliver the same functional benefits and undergo rigorous third-party testing to ensure you're getting the best quality. Your brain and body will thank you. I'm looking forward to giving it a try myself. Get 45% off your first subscription order of 30 servings of Coffee Plus or Bold Plus. You also receive a starter kit with over $100 in free gifts, including a rechargeable frother and gunmetal serving spoon by going to everydaydose.com/Walsh or entering Walsh at checkout. You'll also get free gifts throughout the year. That's everydaydose.com/Walsh for 45% off your first order. And then there's this Facebook post from a different neighbor describing her experiences with Joss. Quote, I lived across this man for years. He started gunfights constantly, and he burnt his own house down trying to make a meth lab inside. He constantly threatened his surrounding neighbors and played victim when cops came. He used to throw bricks through my window and tore several of our mailboxes down. And no one on that block ever yelled homophobic slurs at him. It's a lie from his, quote, husband for sympathy, close quote. Now, these multiple independent accounts are believable in part because of Joss's public behavior. In fact, just two days before his death, Joss crashed an event for the King of the Hill revival at the Paramount Theater in Austin, and he had to be escorted out by security. According to People magazine, quote, while the panel was in full swing, Joss stood up and approached the microphone set up for the Q&A portion of the event, which had not begun yet. The onlooker says that security guards came out at this time. The eyewitnesses says that audience members laughed nervously in the crowd and that King of Hill co-creators Mike Judge and Greg Daniels didn't seem alarmed, while others appeared a bit worried or uncomfortable. So here's part of that footage of what took place. It was shot by an attendee using the name Brandon Brokenheart on Facebook. Watch.
But he said the mic wasn't going to be used. And I'm an actor. I see a mic, I use it. I see it wrong, I make it right. I take a breath, I want to breathe. And no offense, sir, I'm not a super fan. I said there's a hole in my fucking where my money should go. There's a hole. There's a hole. My house burned down 3 months ago. Because I'm gay. I've had a couple loves in my life.
So he's obviously falling apart personally and professionally. He thought these people snubbed him by not inviting him onto the stage, although you can kind of see why they didn't want him on stage. So he interrupts them while they're speaking. He shuts the whole event down. He veers between a joking demeanor and, being dead serious as he rants incoherently about 10 different topics. For example, he says that his house was burned down because he's gay, which is completely different from what he said a few weeks ago when he acknowledged that he may have caused the fire himself. And meanwhile, everybody in the room is, nervously hoping that he's not going to become violent because he's acting like a schizophrenic. 2 days later, what do you know? The neighbors say that he was acting like a drug addict, screaming at random people while carrying a pitchfork. And to be clear, I don't know exactly why he was shot. No one does at this point. We can't say whether Joss was threatening anyone or whether the shooting was justified or not at this point. But the balance of the evidence overwhelmingly suggests that he was not minding his own business and checking the mail when, out of nowhere, he was executed for being in a gay relationship, as the media and LGBT activists are claiming. There are about 1 million reasons why that claim is not convincing, starting with the fact that he wasn't even in a gay relationship, as well as the fact that he's repeatedly acted like a lunatic in public, and the fact that the source is a trans-identifying woman with every incentive to play the victim. And indeed, San Antonio police, who have access to all the available evidence, have come to the same conclusion. Here's what they wrote, quote, SAPD Homicide is currently investigating the murder of Mr. Jonathan Joss. Despite online claims of this being a hate crime, currently the investigation has found no evidence to indicate that Mr. Joss's murder was related to his sexual orientation. But because reality doesn't matter to these people, this statement hasn't convinced LGBT activists to stop claiming that Jonathan Joss was executed for being gay, nor have any of the other facts I just outlined. They still won't admit that Matthew Shepard was killed 30 years ago because of a meth deal gone bad, not because he was gay. In fact, one of Shepard's killers was a man that he'd allegedly occasionally had sex with himself, meaning that one of the killers was gay. Every single one of these hate crime hoaxes, going back 30 years, and every single one of these hate crime claims going back 30 years has been a fraud. This is just the latest example of a trend that we've all seen for decades now. If anything's changing, it's that the hoaxes are becoming far more incoherent and lazy and unconvincing. I mean, you only see lies that are this transparent and desperate from people who are losing and who know they're losing. Desperate to find some justification for Pride Month and the LGBT movement in general, these pathological liars are deliberately attempting to exploit the very predictable and tragic death of an unstable guy, all under the guise of compassion and social justice. It's a fraud. And that's no surprise because their entire movement is a fraud. And the more they pretend otherwise, the more they pretend to care about Jonathan Joss, and the more they pretend to be terrified of phantom homophobic gangs that randomly stalk and torment gay men in San Antonio, the more obvious it is how truly powerless and pathetic these people have become. If you'd like to see what else I have to say, you can access my full show by going to dailywire.com or by going to the Matt Walsh Show Twitter page. Hope to see you there. Godspeed.